I just picked up a 27-inch IPS display from LG. It's a 4K panel that runs at 240 Hz, but also has a 1080p 480 mode for ultra high speed gaming. The stand assembles with no tools and was really easy to put together. It has an external power brick with a Mickey Mouse style AC cord adapter and also comes with a high speed HDMI cable, a USB cable for the built in hub, and a DisplayPort cable. The stand allows the display to move up and down, tilt towards or away from you, and it can swivel in one direction for a vertical orientation. On the bottom, it has two HDMI 2.1 48 gigabit per second ports and one DisplayPort 2.1 input. It also has a USB hub and the DC power input next to the ports. The menu is navigated with a joystick-style button, and while I usually don't like these monitor menu controls, this one wasn't bad at all, and I actually thought it was even better than the more expensive OLED version of this same display. There's also a headphone jack and the button to switch between 240 and 480 Hz modes. Here's a quick macro shot of its panel showing the really sharp RGB subpixels. Also, it looks like this panel drew between 25 and 55 watts of power draw depending on what was on screen, then settled into about 45 watts with the Blurbuster's map scroll screen running. You can use online calculators to see how much it'll cost you to run based on how many hours a day it's in use. Unfortunately, it doesn't come with speakers built in, but you could just get a cheap soundbar and use that headphone jack to get audio. Just a note, the USB hub gets its power from the cable connected to your PC, not the monitor, so you can't power any USB devices without a PC connection. Panel latency on this monitor is really impressive at less than 2 milliseconds of lag with 60 Hz inputs. Most high refresh rate displays have a lot more latency in 60 Hz modes, but this one is great. It also processes 480i and 240p OK with extra lag needed for deinterlacing, but I always remind people not to send amazing displays like this 480i directly without a scaler. Speaking of scalers, I also wanted to verify 60 Hz lag in 4K mode, so I used the RetroTink 4K. The Tink is adding less than a millisecond of lag, so the total shown on screen matches, less than 2 milliseconds. Toggling HDR and VRR doesn't really change the lag at all in any configuration, which is great. If we switch to 120 Hz output, the Tink shows that it's adding 9.1 milliseconds of lag, and it's showing about 9.9 on screen. That's less than a millisecond of display lag. When we switch to the panel's native refresh rate of 240 Hz, the Tink is adding 13.3 milliseconds of lag. If we deduct that from the 14.1 shown on screen, that's once again less than a millisecond of display lag, making this an excellent panel to use in all modes. While this is a gaming monitor, my primary use for it is basic desktop work and also video editing, and this is the clearest and brightest monitor I've personally ever worked on. I don't think you'd ever need to turn the brightness all the way up to 100, and I personally leave it set to 50% even in a well-lit room. Text sharpness is really impressive even with my uneven settings. See, I need a 4K panel for video editing, but text in that mode is far too small for my aging eyes, so I use Windows to scale to an uneven 175%. Even with that setting and sharpness set to 50, it looks perfect to my eyes. Of course, dropping sharpness to 0 is pretty blurry and it's too sharp at 100%. There's also some weird artifacting that happens at 100% in most cases, including text and modern gaming, so I'd recommend sharpness between 50 and 75%. Speaking of gaming, this display is compatible with all the weird retro gaming signals I threw at it. OSSC with SNES, MiSTer in its lowest latency modes, 480p retro consoles, they all worked without issue. It also does a decent job sharpening up 1080p signals if you prefer that look for games with sharp 2D graphics. Just once again, keep an eye out for artifacting with the sharpness all the way up. Motion clarity is really good for an IPS display in 240 Hz mode, and while I'm using the Blurbuster's test UFO pattern here to demonstrate, it's also noticeable just in basic desktop use. If we press the button and switch the display to 480 Hz mode, the motion is even smoother. If your game or PC can handle 1080p 480, absolutely try it and see if you prefer it over 4K 240. The 480 Hz mode is significantly less sharp though, so definitely don't use it for text or office use, only gaming. But in-game, the sharpness reduction is far less noticeable. Unfortunately, this display doesn't have any built-in black frame insertion options, but I was able to use the RetroTink 4K to add it to 60Hz sources, at the cost of brightness and flicker, just like you'd always see when implementing BFI. Just note that the panel will pulse and glitch when BFI is enabled unless you change a few menu options. First, go into the Picture Adjust menu and turn off Deep Black Pro. Then go into the Game Adjust menu and set response time to off. This is actually the first time I've ever seen BFI look good on something that wasn't an OLED, and I was impressed with the results. I'd just suggest using BFI in 180Hz mode, otherwise you'd risk burn-in and image retention. You'll actually always risk some kind of image retention when using BFI, but it's much safer for IPS panels going from 60 to 180Hz rather than 120 or 240. So that's about it. This display is by far the best desktop monitor I have ever owned, and while it's not as good as OLED for gaming, I certainly wasn't disappointed in it.